haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph. 15 lines from the top, about a third way down from the top of the Amud. Our Mishnah states that the Kohen Gadol does the avodah of the chafina. That means he takes from the machta that's filled with kitaris, and he then takes 2 handfuls from that machta. The Gemara now asks the following question, Gabe Chafina. Boy Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Chofan umeis mahu. If the Kohen Gadol performs the Chafina, and then subsequently he dies before he actually burns the Ketaris in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What's the din? Sheikanes acher michafinosoi. Can another Kohen Gadol who's now performing the avodah in his place, can he use that chafina that was performed by the first Kohen Gadol or not? Rabbi Chanina says the following. Bo urei shailos harishonim. He says, come and see that we are discussing my own question is a question of the Rishonim. Now there's our door, our current generation, is made on the same shayla, as the same question that bothers the Rishonim earlier, Chachamim. Lememro, the Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Kashish. The Gemara asks, does that mean to say that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is older than Rabbi Chanina? After all, Rabbi Chanina says, come and see that our generation is saying the same question as the earlier generations. Mashma, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is older. Ask the Gemara, is that so? Ve'omar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Li hite Rabbi Chanina, li shtoi shachaloim, b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yoshua says that Rabbi Chanina, he matered me from eating, he allowed me to eat shachalayim on Shabbos as a refuah. And therefore, the fact that he allowed me, he gave me a hara, is mashma, that I went to seek his hara, and he's a greater and earlier chacham than myself. The Gemara now parenthetically asks on what he just said, and that's going to come back to the proof to explain that indeed Rabbi Chanina was older than Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Says the Gemara, Lishtois Pshita, asked the Gemara, the fact that he got a heter to drink shachalayim, the juice of shachalayim on Shabbos, that's poshit. In other words, here we're talking about the fact that he was sick and he then was given the heter to drink shachalayim juice. Ask the Gemara, that's poshit. This not, it says in the Mishnah, a person may eat that food which a normal person will eat, or drink that person which a normal, healthy person will drink. If he is sick, he can do so also on Shabbos, because then it doesn't appear to be for a refuah. In other words, refuah on Shabbos is also midrabanan. The Rabbanan were concerned that a person who then takes refuah on Shabbos, that person may come to grind the refuah, the herbs, whatever it is that he's taking. But if it's food that a healthy person eats or drinks, then the fact that a sick person eats and drinks on Shabbos is not going to be recognizable that he's doing so as a result of refuah, and therefore it's mutter. So what was the chiddush that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was saying that Rabbi Chanina gave him the heter to drink shachalayim juice? The Gemara says, rather, the heter that he gave was that he can grind the herbs, the shachalayim herbs, and he can drink that on Shabbos. So here's already a malacha deraisa of toichin, of grinding. Ask the Gemara, heichidami, what is the case that we're talking about? If we're talking about somebody who was a choila, sheyesh boy sakana, and therefore his life was endangered, so then, of course it's mutter, because it's doiche Shabbos. And leke sakanto meiser aser, but if he doesn't have the degree of choile, sheyesh boy sakana, so therefore he's not allowed to then perform an iser d'oraisa, and therefore be aser. So what are we talking about over here? La'olam, says the Gemara, di'ika sakanto. He is in a state of sakana, his life is threatened. V'hochi kami boile, and this was what he was asked. Mimasya de nechel alayu shabto, or loy masya v'lo nechel alayu shabto. The shaila was, does this grinding of the shachalayim and drinking it as juice, will that actually perform a refuah? Will that actually mirape a person who was sick on Shabbos? And therefore it was a doubt whether this is truly a remedy or not. That was the shaila. On that, Rabbi Chanina said that indeed it is mutter to use, to go ahead and grind and drink the juice on Shabbos. Asked the Gemara, Umayshna Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Chanina, the sage, why was he then particularly asked about this shaila? After all, you have to be somebody who's familiar with refuah. Answers the Gemara, that's true. Mishum de baki berefuahu. He was indeed a doctor. He was an expert in refuah. Dom Rabbi Chanina, me'oilom lo sha'alani odom al makas pirda levana v'chaya. Never did a person ask me a shaila about a wound that resulted from a white mule and lived. So we see from over here that indeed he was asked shailas about makos, about wounds. So he is a baki in refuah. Just the Gemara asks, but we do see that even those who have been wounded by a white mule has survived. The Gemara says, Ema v'chayos. Change what he said to mean, what he meant to say is that never did I have a shaila that when somebody was wounded by a white mule, that the wound healed. Ask the Gemara, we find that indeed such wounds do heal. Answers the Gemara is a specific type of white mule that we're talking about. Besumkin inhu v'chivron reish karei ka'amrinon. We're talking about a white mule that the roish, the tip, the head of its foot is whitened. Such a white mule that the makkah does not ever heal. Now the Gemara comes back to what he brought this in the first place. Mikol makom shma'min Rabbi Chanina kashish. From here we can derive that indeed Rabbi Chanina was older than Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And therefore, if Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi came to ask a question of Rabbi Chanina and he called him Rabbi Chanina, it must be that indeed he was younger than Rabbi Chanina. So how could Rabbi Chanina begin by saying that our generation is even asking an earlier generation's question, and we see that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi from the earlier generation asked such a question? The Gemara says, Elihachi ka'amar. This is what Rabbi Chanina was saying. She'elason keshe'ela shel rishonim. He's saying that indeed this question that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is asking is a shaila of the rishonim. Umi Omar Rabbi Chanina hachi. Asked the Gemara, how could Rabbi Chanina indeed suggest such a question himself, as if Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is not asking a question that he himself asked? Hare, he would never ask such a question, asked the Gemara. V'omar Rabbi Chanina. Bepar, it says in the pasuk that the par that the Kohen Gadol shechs on Yom Kippurim for the chatos, it says bepar v'loy bedomoy shel par, meaning to say, if the par that he shechted, then that Kohen Gadol who shechted the par had then died before the blood was sprinkled in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So, according to Rabbi Chanina, then it's not going to be valid. You have to then have the new Kohen Gadol shecht a new par. V'om Rabbi Chanina ketore shechofna koydem shechita shechita zapar lo yasav lo klum. And therefore, we have a statement that Rabbi Chanina makes that since there's a Seder HaAvoida, which requires that the Ketares, the Chafina, be done first, then starts with the Shechting of the par first, then the Kohen Gadol gives, after he's Mekabel the Dam, the blood to the other Kohen to stir the blood, on the Roivet HaRevi, on the fourth row in the Azara. Then the Kohen Gadol goes himself up to the Kevesh, up to the Mizbeach. He gets coals, and he brings down the coals to the same area, the Roivet HaRevi. And then they bring him the Kli, the Machta filled with Kitaris, and he does the Chafina. So, according to Rabbi Chanina, if indeed the Kohen Gadol died after he shechted the par, then the Chafina is not valid, he says. He has to then go ahead and redo the the shechting of the par, the new kohen, and then the chafina, so that would be keseder. The Gemara says, indeed, this is what you have to say. From the fact that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked this question, it follows that he holds, not like me, but he holds indeed that if the Kohen Gadol were to die after shechting the par's blood would still be valid, whereby Memela, the chafin that was done, would also be valid. In fact, Rabbi Chanina points out, therefore, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who asked this question, he holds like those Rishonim who are different the way that I asked the question. They hold differently than myself, but he holds like them, that indeed the dam of the par is still valid. Now ask the Gemara, my have Allah. So what is the then outcome of this shaila? Can a Kohen Gadol who then performed the chafina and then died, with the new Kohen Gadol, can he bring that chafina into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and burn the Ketores, or not? Does he have to do the new chafina himself? Rav Papa said, if we say that the chafina that is performed outside, when the Kohen Gadol takes the Ketores from the Machta and he performs the chafina outside, when he goes back now into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he has to re-perform a chafina by then taking when he put in, I should say before, when he put in the chafina on the outside and he took the Ketores in his handfuls, he then put it into the kaf. When he now goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, does he have to perform a new chafina by pouring the Ketores from the kaf into his handfuls? And then the handful is pouring into the coals, burning the Ketores. So according to Rav Papa, if you say that he does have to perform a new chafina inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then chaveiro nichnas bechafinasoi. Then the fellow kohen that now is performing the Kohen Gadol's job as a new Kohen Gadol because the first Kohen Gadol died, then it's going to he can go ahead and enter and use that chafina because the ha mekayma chafina. Because since he's going to be performing a new chafina anyways in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so certainly it will be valid that you can go ahead and use the original chafina that was done by the Kohen Gadol. But if he does not go ahead and perform a second chafina in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, says Rav Papa, then you will ask the question whether it's valid or not. Can he use the original Kohen Gadol's chafina or not? Omar le Rav Huna b'Rav Yoshua le Rav Papa. Rabbi Yehuna Rav Yeshua rejects Rav Papa's svar, and he says like this: Adarabba, quite on the contrary. If you want to say that a new chafina must be performed in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then he cannot use the original chafina from the Kohen Gadol who died. Because it's impossible that he'll have the exact same hands that will be the exact same measurement as the Kohen Gadol before. It'll be either less or it'll be more, and it has to be the exact same to be then burnt as the Ketores in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. However, if we say that the Kohen Gadol does not have to perform a new chafina in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then then indeed we'll have the question. Now the Gemara asks, now, is this indeed so? Do we require the Kohen Gadol to make a second chafina when he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or not? Toshma, let's bring the following proof. V'kach haisa midasa. Our Mishnah states, after it says that the Kohen Gadol puts the Ketores in the kaf, from his handfuls into the kaf, it adds the words v'kach haisa midasa, and says in the Mishnah that according to the hands of the Kohen Gadol, if he has large hands, it'll be a larger amount of Ketores, smaller hands will be a smaller amount, v'kach midasa, and this will be its measurement. So the Gemara wants the proof from these words. My love, kishem shemidasa mi bachutz kach midasa mi bifnim. Isn't these words just coming to say that the same way that the Kohen Gadol did a chafina on the outside, and therefore, according to the goydel of his hands, if he has larger hands, it'll be the amount of the Ketaris, or smaller hands, a smaller amount. Then V'kachi Midas is coming to teach me, and he does the same thing when he's now inside in the Kodesh Kadoshim. He also makes Chafina. So l'char, we would have a proof from these words, V'kachi Midasa, that indeed he makes a second Chafina. The Gemara rejects this and says, "Lo, you have no proof from the words v'kachi midas in our Mishnah, because dilma she'im ratza la'asais mida oise." Perhaps what it means to say v'kachi midasa, that if a person wants to use, a Kohen Gadol wants to use a kli that is the same exact measurement as his handfuls, then that's also okay. They can take the kli to draw forth from the macht of Getaris, and that would be sufficient if he wants. Inami alternatively it has to be exact measurement. That's what it's coming to say. Not less and not more. In other words, no particles of the Ketaris should be either added or subtracted from when he then will bring into the Kodesh Kadashim and burn the Ketaris. So you have no proof. Now the Gemara wants to bring a different proof, and this time it's going to be successful. Toshma, the Gemara is now going to prove on top of Memtes Amud Beis that indeed the Kohen Gadol who did the Chafina still has to do another Chafina in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Keitzad hu oisek, because the Brises asks, how does he do such a Chafina inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Oiches es habazoch b'roishe etzba oisav. He holds the spoon, which is referring to the kaf, with the ends of his fingers. V'yesh oimim b'shinov. Some say actually with his teeth, so that the ladle's handle is facing him. Umale begudoloi ad shemagaz lebein atzile yodov. And then he slowly raises it with his thumbs, so that it will then rest on his forearms until it reaches his elbows. Then it says, "V'choizer umachzir l'toich chafnav." Then he will choizer umachzir l'toich chafnav into his hands. It'll be able to then tilt the ketaris into his hands. Now he'll have handfuls malay chafnav of ketaris. Bryce goes on to say, "V'tzoivra kedei sheyeh oshana shoyeh lavoi." And then he will then pour it, that the ketaris, onto the coals that are resting on the ground now, so that the smoke will then slowly come about. Some say the opposite. Mefazra kedei sheyeh shana mimaheres lavoi. He'll scatter the ketaris onto the coals, so that the oshan will then come up more quickly, because it'll be a thinner layer. V'zuhi avoida kasher shebamikdash. And this is an avoida that is kasher shebamikdash. Most difficult. Ask the Gemara, zuhi v'suloi. This is what's difficult in mikdash, but there's no other avodas that are considered to be kasher shebamikdash. V'ha'ika malika. Behold, there's malika that the kohen, when he shechs the bird, so he shechs it in such a way that he has to hold the bird and use the thumb with a long nail to then shecht from the back of the nape of the bird, from the back of the neck, which is a very difficult avodah. V'ha'ika kemitza. There's also kemitza that it's referred to as an avodah that's kasher shebamikdash. Kemitza refers to then taking with the three fingers that we described about a daf ago, that he takes through three fingers, and he takes it and he takes the mincha offering, and he has to make it so that there's nothing going to then protrude, and if it does, he has to separate it so that nothing from the inside will be removed. And therefore, it's also difficult. He has to take his thumb and carefully level it out on the top, and he also take his pinky and level it out from the bottom. So that's also considered to be kasher shebamikdash. So the Gemara explains slightly different the language, and says, "Elazuhi avoida kasher me avoidos kasher shebamikdash." This is the avoida that is difficult as the avoidas that are koshos in the mikdash. The several avoidas that are kosher in the mikdash, we mentioned the others before. Shma mina, now Gemara comes back to its proof. We ask, did the Kohen Gadol have to do a chafina also inside the base, the Kodesh HaKadoshim? To which the Gemara brings a proof now from this. Shma mina choifen v'choizer v'choifen shma mina.